Before I get started here, I want to talk a little bit about something. Uh, This paper I'm holding in my hand, there are copies over there on the table. But what I'm asking people to do is take one of these papers here, and everybody in my mind has a story in their life about Vermilion. And that's what I'm looking for. It's maybe a story from maybe 500 to 700 words, just one little story about some experience you had in Vermilion. What I intend to do when I have them collected and edited is to put it together in a book for the people here in Vermilion. I think it'd be very interesting. The reason I got that idea, I was writing about something, and I remember years ago they had the paper rags man. Do you know what I'm talking about? During the war, the junk man went around with a horse and a carriage or a truck-like thing and collected junk, paper and rags. And you could hear them as they went around the town. You hear the horse clop, clop, clop along, and the guy, it always sounded to me like paper rape or paper dape or something like that. But he was saying paper rags is what he was yelling. So I went to look for something about it, and I found this book. This is from the west side of Cleveland, and you can see how they heard it. They heard paper wrecks, paper rags. But these are a collection of stories from the west side of Cleveland, near west side of Cleveland, written by individuals about little experiences they had growing up or living on the west side. And I thought how nice it would be for Vermilion to have a book like that. It would probably fill more than one book, but one book to start with. So I'd like to get those stories and get them edited, and then maybe get a copy back to you if you write a little story after it's edited so that you could approve it. And then we'll put it together and put it in a book. I thought that'd really be nice, and maybe we can get it done for Christmas. I'm hoping anyway. But in any case, over there on the table are papers like this. So if you would grab one and write me a story. Years ago, I met a guy in Cleveland, east side of Cleveland. He was a Pepsi-Cola truck driver. And I used to talk to him quite a bit, tell stories back and forth. But at the time, that was my old hippie days. And at the time when I was talking to someone, I'd end every sentence by saying, you know? And the guy stopped me one time, he said, I know what I know, you know what you know, but nobody will know what any of us know unless you tell us. So tell me. And now I'll get on with this.
Ten Good Men, Part 2. This is a list of persons that, in my view, were among the most influential Vermilionites of the early 20th century. It's an idea I've been playing with for some time. But honestly and truly, there are so many to choose from, the task is realistically impossible. For one thing, it's entirely subjective. I chose 10 men that I think were the most influential. Someone else might choose others, and that's okay. But some might agree that those I put on my list were at least among the many who made positive contributions to the development of our community during the early years of the last century.
And there is no pecking order here. I don't think one person did more than others. All contributed in their own ways. As I see it, it was oddly enough an unconcerted, concerted effort by each. Vermilion spelled with two L's at the end of the 19th century, is often called the city of Lake Captains. The name beckons back to days when sailing vessels were born along the banks of the river, and the men and crews that built and sailed them populated the town. But by the end of the century, the boat building industry had dramatically declined, and commercial fishing, an industry that had been around since folks first settled in the area, began to grow. In 1854, a German immigrant named Adam Kishman, whose farm bordered the lake near the area that much later became the site of the Lorraine Ford plant, purchased a scow with a man-powered drop hammer. With it, he drove pilings into the lake bottom just off the beach. He fastened some fish nets to those pilings and went into the business of fishing. It is a process called seine fishing. Early every morning, before their duties in the field had begun, two farm workers would launch a dory from the beach, one operating the oars, the other steering and removing the fish from the nets. Upon returning to shore with their bounty, the fish were packed in ice that had been harvested from the lake during the winter. They were then placed into storage. Some of the fish were packed in boxes and taken to the Brownhelm station to be shipped by train to other parts of the country. The remainder was either sold locally or purchased by peddlers who took them by horse and wagon over the very corduroy roads to markets as far away as Worcester. Adam's oldest son, Henry, began working on the farm and the fishery as early as 1872. But by 1876, three of Adam's 5 sons, Henry, along with his brothers Edward and Charles, had left farming and had become involved in the commercial fishing business full-time. Innovations in the fishing operation over the years induced the boys to forego the inherent difficulties in the old shore shuttle fishing style with a dory to that of using sailboats that allowed them to set nets out further in the lake. Then, with the arrival of steam-powered boats and the advent of gill nets in the latter part of the 19th century, the boys abandoned the shore operation altogether and moved to a new location on the Vermilion River. The approximate site of this concern was just southwest of the current Vermilion River Bridge. Henry managed the fish house and retail end of the business, and Edward captained their steam tug telephone. Charles left for Lorraine to run the boot company's fishery. At the turn of the century, Edward left the Vermilion fishery and with the financial support of some Sandusky men began to manage a new fishery located in Huron. Brother Henry took a manager position with Vermilion's Driscoll Fish Company. The Driscoll Company was situated on the west bank of the river, north of the river bridge in a place that eventually became Parsons Boat Marina/storage. In 1905, Henry, who had found his work with Driscoll to be less than agreeable, purchased the Edson and Nichols River property about a quarter-mile north of the Driscoll houses. It was in this spot the business officially known as the Kishman Fish Company of Vermilion was born, thrived, and grew into one of the most successful fisheries on Lake Erie. In 1909, Edward's company in Huron joined the Vermilion operation. Henry was elected company president and Edward vice president. 3 years later, they assumed control of another fishery in Grand Harbor, and brother Charles joined them as manager of that concern. The name Kishman is now synonymous with commercial fishing in Vermilion and all along the northern shores of Lake Erie. During the period Lake Erie historians now refer to as the golden age of the industry, the Kishman family owned and operated fisheries in Grand Harbor, Huron, and, of course, Vermilion. The story of how this came to be is purely an American story wherein success is a consequence not only of good fortune, but also of intelligence and hard work. The Kishman brothers worked the family business together for the remainder of their lives. Edward died in 1944, and Charles passed away 2 years later, while Henry remained president of the company until his death in 1948. His son, Lester, who had joined the business in 1931, took over management in 1935, eventually assuming his father's post as the head of the company. When Lester retired on December 31st, 1959, local resident Ray Full became company president. Over 100 years have passed since Adam Kishman pushed his old dory off the beach of his farm to collect his first harvest from Lake Erie. The consequence of that rather mundane action was but the first step in the realization of a story of success that is purely and unconditionally American.
A.D. Baumhart. He was born in 1873 on a farm on the west side of Vermilion. At the age of 8 years, I became afflicted with a tubercular hip and didn't leave the yard again for 3 years. This rendered me too delicate for farm work, so work was found for me in a grocery store. I was transferred to a dry goods and general store where I remained for about 6 months. About that time, my brother opened a drugstore and I became his assistant and served an apprenticeship lasting 7 years. After that, I attended the College of Pharmacy. Upon leaving the college, I went to Berea and worked in a drugstore for nearly a year. Salary $50 per month, which, by the way, was the largest salary I ever received. Returning to Vermilion, I bought the Quigley store, then located on Division Street, where All Heights Sick Hardware store now stands. In 1898, I made a contract with a Bell telephone company to put in the first telephone exchange in Vermilion. The contract provided that I was to furnish the heat, light, office room, and proper operators to handle the business. The exchange opened March 18, 1898, with 19 subscribers. This grew rapidly until about 200 subscribers were obtained. This remained in my drugstore for about 12 years. On December 3, 1903, our store burned, catching fire from other buildings in a frame row. The fire occurred about 4 o'clock, so we had time to remove part of the drug stock. In less than an hour, I had purchased the Harris drugstore, then located where Rathbun's store now is, and by 7 o'clock the next morning was doing business in the new location. All telephone subscribers were in working order by 7 o'clock next evening. The following spring, the Lakeshore Electric line opened and I was made ticket agent and electric package agent. I stayed here, lasted 2 years, and then the store was moved into a part of the room now occupied by Norman Ness. No, this refers to one of the shops beneath the Masonic Temple on the west side of Main Street, a few doors south of Liberty Avenue. After another period of 7 years, I found this room too small, so I built and moved into my present location on June 23, 1916. My school life was begun in the State Street brick building. 2 years later, I was transferred to a building known as the Old Seminary, a frame structure of 2 rooms which occupied the site where the water tower now stands. The building is still in existence and is now occupied by Harry Mead, the plumber. Note, the water tower stood in Hanover Square. When it was built, the school was moved to a new site on the east side of Grand Street between Liberty and the railroad tracks. It was eventually torn down. Later, I was transferred to the brick building again, where I continued in school until the course was completed. Although I finished the high school course and not being convinced that I should write an oration to be delivered from the stage platform of the town hall on commencement night, I quit school 2 weeks ere the term ended to embark on the pill rolling game. This, of course, was a bad mistake, for it cost me to go through life without possessing a high school diploma.
Imagine what would have happened to my boys should they have suggested such a procedure to me. If I remember correctly, another member of our Rotary Club did a similar thing to go sailing. I too tried my hand at sailing, but after having my feelings hurt by the mate and getting seasick, I got off the boat after one trip when I tied up at Ashtabula, glad to return to the long hours of the drugstore in preference to life on the briny deep. The last night out was the fatal night on which the steamer Western Reserve went down with all hands except one. In 1906, I was married to F.E.C. Washburn, who passed away on November 1st, 1918. On August 15th, 1921, I married my present wife, Frances L. Bullock of Cadiz, Ohio. I am the father of two sons, A.D. Baumhart Jr. and Charles Wheeler.
Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too.
Vermilion, March 2nd, 1922. The funeral of 58-year-old Edward L. Coen, organizer, and for many years the mainspring of the Vermilion Banking Company, will be held here Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Bankers and others prominent in financial circles throughout Ohio will attend. Coen, who was active in the business and social life of Vermilion since locating here in 1891, died Saturday night at 10:30 at his home. For some time, he had been in poor health. He was the first child in a family of 9 children to pass away. His brother, F.W., is vice president and general manager of the Lakeshore Electric. Much of the following is from Peake's history of Erie County pertaining to Mr. Coen. A prominent figure in Ohio banking affairs and one especially influential in furthering financial and other business activities in Erie County is Edward Coen. He has been the chief executive of the Erie County Banking Company of Vermilion during the entire period of its existence. He was formerly cashier of this solid and well-ordered banking institution and is now the first vice president. Born in Fulton County, Indiana, January 24, 1864, Mr. Coen passed his boyhood and youth in the country. His early education advantages were those of the public schools of his home township at the high school at Rensselaer, Indiana. He was a good student and made the use of his opportunities. For years, he was a teacher in the schools of his home county. Soon after he reached his majority, he went to southwestern Kansas and for nearly 4 years was engaged in the real estate and farm insurance business. He was also one of the founders of Burkenford County, Kansas during the late 80s. After leaving Kansas, Mr. Coen spent a year in the Rock Island and Pacific Railway in Chicago, and in April 1891, took up his residence in Vermilion. Here he effected the organization of the Erie County Bank of Vermilion. The following year, this institution was incorporated as a state bank in the present title. The Erie County Banking Company was adopted. An expert financier. Since the time the practical management of the bank revolved upon Mr. Coen, who was in many ways an exemplary banker and an expert financier. When the bank was organized, he became cashier, a position he held until August 19, 1915. Since 1903, he has also been first vice president and has given the bank the benefit of his broad experience even after resigning his position as cashier. Mr. Coen is also a recognized leader in Ohio banking circles. From 1907 to 1918, he served as secretary-treasurer of Group Number 6, and from 1910 to 1913 as chairman of the group in the Ohio Bankers Association. During his term as group chairman, he was also a member of the Council of Administration and served as chairman during 1913. He served as vice president of the Bank Ohio Bankers Association in 1914 and as president in 1915. Also a telephone man, Mr. Coen was also the primary force in affecting the organization and incorporation of the Vermilion Telephone Company and was president and director since it was organized. He was also a director and treasurer of the Gallia Telephone Company in Gallipolis, Ohio. He served 15 years on the Vermilion Board of Education and was president for several years. In politics, he was a Republican. He was also a member of the Congregational Church of Vermilion. In 1893, Mr. Coen married Miss Cora Lawless, the daughter of the late Captain James Lawless of Vermilion. The couple had 2 sons, Edward M., and another son, Clarence L., who died at the age of 4 and a half.
Mr. Coen died on the 25th day of March 1922. He was only 58 years old.
Fischer. But my memories of him are those through the eyes of a little boy. Perhaps I was 8 or 10 years old, and they are clouded by all the people and years that have passed since. This Elton I do not remember, nor would it be possible. This photo of Mr. Fischer is taken in perhaps 1917 or 18. He would have been in his mid-20s when these shadows were forever cast in time. His granddaughter, Bobby Riley, thought him a very handsome man. Here he's standing beside the fire chief gasoline pump in front of his new garage and showroom for his Chevrolet Buick dealership. His father, George, stands in the foreground. Their faithful pup poses thoughtfully at his feet, and a garage employee relaxes in a chair at the dealership entrance. Elton Lieberman Fischer, Lieberman was his mother's maiden name, was born February 23, 1893 in Vermillion. He was the only son of George and Elizabeth Lizzie Fischer. They also had a daughter they named Maud. Nicholas Fischer was their grandfather. Both Nicholas and George were lumbermen. Nicholas was a wholesale lumberman who worked the virgin forests of Ohio and Kentucky. And while son George followed in his footsteps, he was also well educated, a lawyer and businessman, starting a retail lumber company on the shores of the Vermilion River. He was, in a word, successful. I've no idea as to how long Elton kept his automobile dealership, but in time he apparently sold his share of the business to a partner, Albert Waddy Stone, and the business was moved from the location in this picture to a new building up the street, beside what is now Rudy's Bar and Grill, and renamed Stone's Garage. This is the brick structure directly across the street from Vermilion's Ritter Library. I have been told that before Stone built the existing building that the old Andy Marks home on South Perry Street occupied the site. Stone's business, incidentally, eventually evolved into Sharpnack's Chevrolet dealership.
In any case, Elton eventually assumed the responsibilities inherent in operating his father's lumber company. In January of 1938, a great fire consumed the business along the river, and Elton rebuilt on the opposite side of the road. At the beginning of World War II, he sold the company. It would in time become the Crow Lumber Company. Mr. Fischer owned and managed a considerable amount of property during his lifetime. He sold one of his properties to the federal government to erect Vermilion's first freestanding post office during the late 1950s. He was a Vermilion volunteer fireman, and like many other men in the village, was a member of the local post of the American Legion and Masonic Lodge. He was also an active member of the Sandusky Elks Club. He and his wife, Ruth, had a daughter, Virginia Oler, who passed away in 2006 in California, and a granddaughter, Roberta Bobby Riley. Ms. Riley has, over the years, contributed a good deal of information regarding the history of the family in Vermilion and elsewhere. During World War I, Elton served in both the U.S. Army and the Merchant Marines. The patch on his uniform in the photo has the initials USTC. After searching through numerous sources, in an attempt to discover the meaning of the initials, I, at this time, conclude that he was part of a special training unit that was created during the First War, specifically concentrating on training businessmen to be officers in the Army. If anyone knows better, or more, about such matters, I'd appreciate hearing from them. But however you cut it, Elton Lieberman Fischer was a very special person. He went to his final home in October of 1960 at the rather young age of 67 years. And the shadows he cast across Vermilion's yesteryear are unlikely to be forgotten.
F.W. Wakefield, Thursday, the 6th of December, '08. Alice Wakefield was kind enough to email me this Rockwellian snapshot of her grandfather, F.W. Wakefield, with sons Ernest and Ted aboard the Tobermory II in 1924. It is the best photo I have of the Wakefield family patriarch. And believe it or not, the identities of the persons in it really wouldn't matter if I were simply looking at it as an art critic. It's a great photo. F.W. Wakefield, from a very objective point of view, was very likely the most influential person in Vermilion, Ohio during the 20th century. If one seriously looks at his accomplishments as an inventor, innovator, industrialist, and community leader, it is doubtful that there were many other Vermilionites, aside from, perhaps, George Fischer, who contributed more to the positive development of the place known as Vermilion, Ohio, during the last century. To be certain, there are many great community leaders in Vermilion. And to be equally certain, there are a good number of hard-working men and women who, together, forge a positive future for the community. But Mr. Wakefield's accomplishments were exceptional even by today's standards. Or, perhaps, better said, in spite of today's standards. One must realize that Wakefield was not a Vermilion native. And it may be that allowed him more insight into the potential of the community than those who had been born and raised therein. The first prospectus for Vermilion, Ohio as a great place for businesses to locate was undoubtedly of his design. That prospectus remains a significant historical document. Wakefield was constantly trying to bring additional industry into the community, be it on land or on water. Dahl Motors was one of his success stories. Note, Dahl Ford of Elyria was an offshoot of that original business begun in Vermilion.
Both the Vermilion Boat Club and the South Shore Regattas are vestiges of Mr. Wakefield's initiatives for a positive future for the community. He gave credit where credit was due by honouring veterans and volunteer workers throughout the community as the years passed. And the inventions and innovations of his company in the lighting industry in both war and peace are well known. To be very sure, F.W. Wakefield became a wealthy person. But the one thing he never became was arrogant. Vermilion, Ohio was his hometown, populated by good people he respected, and for whom and with he was willing to work. To borrow a thought from the American singer, songwriter, novelist, and politician, K. Friedman, money can buy you a fine dog, but only love can make him wag his tail.
Boy, it sure is quiet.
Yeah. That was a great, is this on? That was a really great show. Very nice. Would anybody like to share some stories of any of the men, or if they had any knowledge of them? We'd love to hear them. Anybody?
Margaret.
Yeah.
Every town has their illustrious characters, right?
Oh.
One of them was Cloudy in this town,
Oh, yeah.
and there's been something written about him. But I've been told there was another character, and I wonder if anybody knows about it. His name was Bugle. Apparently, according to Candy and her husband David, this guy was kind of a notorious character here in town. There's very little known about him, but he was an important part of the community. So, I don't know.
Do you know who he is?
I didn't get the name.
Bugle?
Bugle.
U-G-L-E?
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to look for it. Do you know the time frame?
No, he used to come to my in-laws' farm and work, and then he'd go off on a drunk, and then he'd come back and sleep it off. He was like that guy in Andy Mayberry, you know. Sleep it off and go back to work. And after my father-in-law died, his brother was out, and him and my daughter and I went through pictures all night. And I kept seeing this guy in this picture. I said, who is this guy? I don't even know him. And he said it was Bugle. So probably a year later, I did home health for our local hospital, and I was in a lady's house, and she was showing me old newspapers and everything. She lived in Vermillion a long time. And I asked her if she knew. She said, of course, everybody knew Bugle, and I almost fainted, because I thought they were making this up, but she knew who he was too. She said he was harmless, and he just liked to drink, so he would work until he could drink, and then he'd work some more.
I suppose that was a nickname?
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Well, that's why.
I'm gonna have to hunt some pictures up and to see what he looks like.
I don't, the name Bugle doesn't come to my mind right now, but it doesn't mean that I wouldn't know who it was. There are a few people around like that. Anybody else like the story? Dance?
Is the Coen that,
Sing along?
Rich, is the Coen that was on the program somehow related to why Coen Road was named Coen?
Yeah, that's where Coen Road came from.
Okay, so
Yeah,
did
both the brothers, they were really, they were instrumental in the Erie County Bank. Both of them were originally involved, but the one brother got tied up in Sandusky and got involved with the electric interurbans, and then ran the interurban for the rest of his life.
I can remember when my mom was telling about a character by the name of Peg Leg Joe. And when she was little, and Vermillion had board sidewalks, Peg Leg Joe used to take and chase the young girls with his horse and buggy down the sidewalks.
Sounds like something you do, Larry.
Maybe.
But Larry, that's the type of story, if you can remember things like that, just to write down pieces of the story like that, or like you're talking about, what you remember. Great.
Trouble is, Vermillion has, just like they used to say in that TV show, 1,000 stories. All you gotta do is bring them up.
Well, we only do one at a time. Who else has a story? Buddy? My sister sitting back there. Bev?
I just remember Rich when he was born.
Or Phyllis?
Is that a good story?
We'll
I'm
talk
sure.
about that.
I remember when Rich was a cool kid.
Tom Lowe's probably knows some.
They're not repeatable.
Well, you could write them down.
Well, the man that made this library, Mr. Ritter.
Mr. Ritter, yes.
Very well-known person.
Now, we talked about, we had lunch with Phyllis and my sister and some other ladies in the class of 56. At the end, that's a week or so ago. So a lot of the stories did come up. We were talking about Sophie. She was a town character, of course. But going on about, thinking about some other things there, one of them, I'm trying to remember now. Darn it, I can't. I started out thinking about it and I got carried away with Sophie. Do you people know who Sophie was? Sophie lived
Sophie
on,
Stevens.
yeah, Sophie Stevens lived on Decatur Street, across from the police department. There's a big house there with a metal roof. I don't know if you ever noticed it or not. It's a nice home. Sophie was a real character, but she had roots in Vermilion. She had married, early in life, she married a barber named Curtis, and they lived over here on Grand Street somewhere. And then he passed away, and she married another guy named Stevens. Stevens, her husband, worked at the water plant. And Sophie was getting up there in the years when I was a little kid, and when a lot of people here were little kids. And you would go to the movies. Obviously, on Friday nights, everybody would go down to the movies. Well, Sophie always wore this great big overcoat. It seemed like it was a camel-like color. And she would, Diane Rathman was talking a little bit about this. Diane said she would come down to the Rathman store with a lunchbox. She would open the lunchbox and she'd take out 2 pieces of bread. Diane would cut a piece of bologna for her. She'd put it in the bread. She'd grab an apple or something, put it in the lunchbox, go next door to the White Inn, get a cup of coffee, and then take all of this down to her husband down at the water department. Then she'd come back, she'd pick up an apple and a banana, go next door to the White Inn and get a cup of coffee, go across the street to Okagi's and get a dinner, put it all in the bag, and then she would walk down to the theater and go in the theater, and that's where she'd have it under her coat. She'd go in the theater and she'd sit there and have dinner in the theater. Every kid in the theater knew that she was doing it. You could hear the paper bag and all of that, I guess. But she was a town character. Carolyn.
We grew up in what is the half of Granny Joe's, where the ice cream counter is now. We lived there, and the metal fencing was still around it. And Sophie Stevens came around, and I think her car was brown and yellow. And she parked at the corner, and she said, "Do you want to earn a nickel?" And I said, "Yes," because I had no money. And so she said, "I want you to sit here and watch my car." And I sat there for about an hour. She came back, she gave me a nickel and drove off. I don't know what I was supposed to do. To her car.
See, those are the types of stories. I think everybody probably got a, Tootie's mother, Louise. Louise story. I remember when I was a little kid, me and the guys were hanging around down at the, I could have been at the time maybe 10 years old or younger than that, but it was a summer night, and we were hanging out in the corner and underneath a buckeye tree down on Perry and Ohio Street. It was dark out, and we were just talking because the light from the street light was on. And here comes Louise down the street from the tracks. And she comes up to us, and Louise is wearing a fur coat.
Yeah.
It was just unbelievable, but that was Louise. And I didn't know her very well, but I never got to hear her play the piano, and I really wish I had, because I was told that she was really good.
That's what I've always heard.
I heard her, Rich.
Larry's got some Louise stories too. Any more characters out there?
I think everybody has a Louise story that should go on and write the whole book. Because every day was a new day, and she had something new to do that day, a different show. I went to Lorraine, to the Palace Theater, and she was stuffing the top of her nylons with, they weren't there, the kind, you know, that rolled down, with all the toilet paper in the restroom, and asked me if I'd give her a ride home. Of course, I wasn't old enough to drive home, so. And I worked at the bus station here in Vermillion, which was Littman's, and it was, right next to Hart's, where you saw the first bank. And, the same place, that's where all the cigarettes and cigars and chewing tobacco all was kept in their safe, because it was very cold in there. But anyway, she would come in and get her ticket and take the bus to Lorraine and go to the show. She saw every new movie there was. I don't think she missed a one. And she used to buy the chicken somewhere, because she had a whole bag of fried chicken. And so she would go in there and eat there too. Everybody knew her. I think on Broadway, from the bus station up to so many things, and she just entertained always. And another thing I saw when I was a kid was this man who will remain anonymous. You stood there in the window and you watched all the people go up and down the streets, you know, here in Vermilion. And I don't know, maybe it's just Vermilion or because it was a small town, but a lot of characters. And this guy was across by the AMP, which is,
Erie and
that's on the corner.
Erie and Anchor.
Yeah, and they, where a t-shirt shop is, I guess, there now. And their, of course, the sign, you know, that they have the metal, I don't know, sign for 60 or, not 60, yeah, 60. It would be right there on that corner, and this man, he came out of Lefties or whatever it was, and come up there, and he wanted to go across that street. And I watched him a good 15 minutes, maybe a bit more, whether he ever crossed that street where he's still swinging. But he got a hold of that sign, and he was like frozen to it. There wasn't cold enough. But he would step off the curb and go round, and then go round, and he did that for a long time. I don't know if he ever went anywhere, but he was one of our characters. He did many things, but that was the funniest day. I was working with Betty Coen. At that time, she was, I don't know how many of you knew Betty Horning or Russ Horning. They were old Vermilion people too. I was just a kid. I was 13.
You were a kid.
Yes.
See,
I was
I hope you're
13.
writing all that down.
So when I was a kid, I saw all this stuff going going on downtown, some of it you don't know.
Because a lot of the people our age work downtown
Yeah.
in various stores.
I wonder how many people know there's a National Geographic historical marker in downtown Vermillion. It's
Not me.
right at Hart's, Main Street Grill. It's on the east side of the building, almost to the corner. The building kind of comes up, it's got a little ledge on it, and right there it tells the elevation of Vermillion. When I take my Boy Scouts on a hike, we always stop there and discuss it.
You know, when I was talking about Elton Fischer here, one of the biggest thing I really remember about Elton Fischer, when I was a kid, I used to deliver the Vermilion News on Friday mornings all around the downtown section. And I remember one summer walking along Liberty Avenue by Exchange Park there, and going down toward the Fischer home, which was the big mansion on the river there. Elton Fischer was sweeping the gutter, and he looked like a bum. I mean, he was dressed terribly. I didn't know who he was until later on. And I thought, well, why is this guy sweeping up the gutter? I could never figure it out. Then, when I was probably in my 30s, and I lived over in Oakwood, I was cleaning up around the house one day, and I'm out sweeping the gutter. And I'm thinking, you know, this is exactly why he was doing this, so all this stuff didn't get caught in the drain. So it wasn't so stupid after all. But that's a memory I have of Elton. Some of these people, I wish I had known them when they were around. Like I showed a brief at the beginning of the presentation here. There was a picture of a boat, the Grandon. There was Big Ed Lamp's boat. Big Ed Lamp was a very colorful Vermilion guy. I probably wouldn't have liked him if I knew him, but just the stories about him could fill up a book. They're a very, very interesting guy. He was like Paul Bunyan of the Great Lakes. He was a big guy, a strong guy. The stories about him walking across the old wagon bridge back then, because he had the fish house go around to Southwest Fish. He'd be walking across that bridge, he's carrying fish boxes under his arms, you know, full of fish. So he's a strong guy. And stories like that, or stories he jumped on a freight train to come back to Vermilion because he was in Cleveland. That was an easy way to ride. So he jumps on a freight train, he's riding in a boxcar, and these two bums decide they're gonna rob him. He picked them up, threw them out. Or he's coming into the Vermilion Harbor. I can't remember the exact details, but he's coming in with one of his boats into Vermilion Harbor, and he doesn't really have control of the boat. So what he's doing is he's using a rope to lasso things, to steer with, as he's going down the river. Incredible stuff. But a very incredible guy. The guy that won and lost fortunes. You know, he was not a gambler, but he was an entrepreneur. I think he built the last sand sucker here in Vermillion? He built it at the Moe's yard there. Big boat. It was called the Vermilion. But he had, at one time, was going out and he was bringing in a type of clay or something that people thought of value. I have no idea exactly what it was, but he knew a lot about the bottom of the lake. He'd been on the lake all his life. One of the first times when he came into Vermilion, this is one of George Wakefield's books. He came into Vermilion and he pulled his boat up to where Kishman's would be, tied up, and he was coming uptown to get something to eat, maybe go to the hotel or something for the night. And he heard something screaming and yelling coming from this building as he walked through the park there. It wasn't a park at that time. So he goes over there and there's a guy in there, and the guy says, "Let me out of here, will you?" So Ed opens the door and lets the guy free. Well, it was the town lockup. And it was Jim Snyder, the town drunk. But stories like that are just very unique stories. That's big, isn't it? There's a whole bunch of stories about people like that. Yeah, Tom?
Something that's kind of interesting is that, I don't know if any of you remember, but down at the boatyard, originally there was a little white frame building, and that was one of Ed Lamp's twine sheds. And that came from the area of Parsons. And Ed Lamp leased the property for a while. In fact, when the sandsucker was there, from my grandfather. And my dad, as a very small boy, was down there one time. And somebody was in the upper loft, and there was just like a little thing you crawl through. And he said suddenly there was a ladder up to it. This guy came down. This is my dad talking now. All he could see were arms and muscles and stuff like that. A massive guy. And he kind of was related in terms of appearance to a guy like Abe Lincoln, who was supposed to be a lot of wiry bone and muscle. But the guy was legendary for his strength, and obviously was a character.
The strength thing, that's why he's like the Paul Bunyan of the Great Lakes.
And that, when we built the new building in 1960, the brick building on the river, that was the old frame twine shed was sold to one of our customers and moved somewhere out on Darrow Road and turned into a chicken coop. And I don't know where it is. It might still be in existence.
Ed would be proud. But Nuggie knew him. You know, we want to talk about Nuggie Cook, Evelyn Cook. She knew him because I don't know whether he owned the house on Exchange Street or not, where the family lived. But he had an apartment there, or he lived in part of that house, so she knew him. And she said he was a very nice guy, he was very kind, but he was one of the homeliest guys she ever saw. But he was strong. He came out of the Marblehead, Port Clinton area. Interesting person. But there were a lot of interesting persons, a lot of interesting stories around, especially around the river. I remember when Bacchus. Yeah.
Can I,
John?
make a contribution to story time for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think whether we want to admit it or not, all of us have a skeleton in our closet.
No.
Our family does. My grandmother's maiden name was Decker. Her great-grandfather came from Germany in about 1850s and settled in Vermillion, and we came from Germany with 9 kids. They settled all over the Erie County, Vermilion area. They became farmers, shipbuilders, wagon builders, and farmers, of course. There's one family member who became a shipbuilder on the Vermilion River. His name was George, and he had a son named Chris. And they would go upriver and cut down their trees in order to bring them up downriver in order to generate the lumber to make the ships. One of the ships was named Nevada. It wasn't too uncommon that ships at that time were named after states, but anyway, Nevada was captained by a James Decker. James Decker was a family member. And James Decker is the one that wound up in prison in Chicago. He was a commercial freighter on the Great Lakes. He had a fairly prosperous career, hauling gravel and grain and coal and so forth. But ultimately, the old ship started to show its age. It was way too expensive to try to get it repaired, so he gave that up and got rich and went back out into the lake and realized that he had an insurance policy. And so he took the boat over to, with his crew, went into Lake Michigan, and with a intent of getting his insurance policy, he sank the boat down the bottom of Lake Michigan, He self-got a shore, he got his insurance revenue, and the crew members finally fingered him as being a scallywag, and so therefore, ultimately, the insurance company chased him all over the Great Lakes. James Decker, a Vermilion resident, and finally found him in Chicago. And no one ever knows what happens to James Decker, a former Vermilion resident. But anyway, the boat's still down at the bottom of Lake Michigan. We don't know whatever happened to James, but the Maple Grove Cemetery has a lot of Deckers in it. And so anyway, that's a little bit of our skeleton in our closet.
Gotta write that one down.
Yeah.
Write that one down. It's not hereditary though. Well, I'm sure that there's probably 100 stories out there. Please take a sort of paper here and write us a story in 500 to 700 words. We really would appreciate it. We'd really like to hear those stories. I know that there's people here who haven't said anything to have the stories, so please do that for us. Thank you.
Next month is Mary Lynn Myers Hummet's on March 20th. It's a Tuesday night, and she is going to bring her collection of Vermilion memorabilia, and she has really quite extensive collection, and then we're going to have photos of the businesses that she has items for. So I hope you'll join us then. Thank you.
Thank you.